Justin, I'm glad you could join us just in time. Thanks to everybody who's been waiting for us. I'm Robert Wolonsky, the Communications Director here at Heritage Auctions. And I am very happy to be joined in our office headquarters here in Dallas by Samantha Sisler, Production Manager in the Rare Books Department. And I'm also very, very excited to be joined by I got a couple of beeps going on. I don't know if that's mine or yours or somebody else's, but that's okay. Justin Schiller, the antiquarian bookseller of great renown. Justin, of course, is the man who has brought us the Oath of a Freeman that we're going to be auctioning on Wednesday and going to be discussing. And I'm incredibly thrilled to be joined as well by Tyler Measom, the director of Murder Among the Mormons, which I've seen twice on Netflix. It is a three-part true crime docu-series, which is certainly one of the best things to have been on Netflix in a very long time. It debuted on March. I highly recommend after this discussion that you go watch that. So thanks to everybody who's joined us. Some folks have sent in questions in advance. We'll get to all of those during the course of this discussion. But look, I'm just here as the moderator. The three people here with us are the most interesting ones of all. And in fact, we actually have the copy of the Oath of a Freeman with us, as a matter of fact. So Samantha, let's start with you, because the question that I have received the most from people is that we are an auction house that specializes in real American antiquities and pop culture collectibles and things that are authentic in every possible way. We do not auction forgeries. So what makes this the exception to the rule? Why on Wednesday are we auctioning Justin's copy of Mark Hoffman's The Oath of a Freeman?
Well, in selling and working with historical memorabilia, historical artifacts, and printed material, including books, provenance is incredibly important. And in this instance, in selling this particular thing, this Oath of a Freeman, we're establishing the provenance, that it is a forgery, that it is a Hoffman forgery, and we're preventing it from ever being sold in the future or presented in the future as a legitimate, authentic document. So what we're doing is establishing the provenance that this item was forged.
Justin, since this is your copy, let's start with you. You know Mark Hoffman, you knew Mark Hoffman, you worked with Mark Hoffman. Let's talk about your relationship with him and how you came to own this copy of The Oath of a Freeman.
Well, Mark was a client of ours. He and his wife wanted to collect historical children's books. And I think it was 1984 that he selected us at the New York Book Fair. He interviewed several specialist dealers, and we were the lucky ones that he chose. And he definitely had a passion for early books. And very much loved the rare book field. I had no idea of his deep involvement or for how long, but he explained that the money he would be getting to spend was coming from a trust fund, and every 3 or 4 months he would have a payout. And so if he could use that payout to pay us for things that we may have bought for him at auction, for material that he may have bought from us directly, that would be a great help. And of course, I said, there's no problem. Now, I'm going to explain something that is not discussed in any of the reference books on the Oath of a Freeman, because Hoffman told this to me when we were driving in an automobile. We had visited one of our clients in New Jersey, and he was overwhelmed at their collection. And we talked about how he hoped his own collection one day would be comparable. And he said that he's been doing some very exciting discoveries. And I said, like what? And he said, well, the head of the Mormon church had appointed him the archivist. And I said, what does that mean? And apparently it meant that he could go into the depths of the church research collection and go through all the material. And if he found anything valuable that was not Mormon related, he would recommend selling it. And that way the church would have money to pay for some of the expensive Mormon discoveries that he was making. Of course, no one knew at the time he was also manufacturing them. I asked him, what sort of things are you discovering? And he said, I can't tell you that because there are apparently 12 elders underneath the head of the church. And he said to sell anything would require going to the council and getting their permission. And the head of the church predicted that there would always be someone or two or three who would object to selling anything that's been in the church collection. And so for that reason, he simply needs to select what he would like to sell, verify that it has no Mormon link, and sell it. And I said that, that sounds remarkable. And I said, but very often if it's anything valuable, don't you have to establish a provenance, where it came from? And he said, he's working on that. He doesn't quite know, he hasn't come up with anything quite special enough yet. And this was probably 4 months or so before the oath of a Freeman surfaced. And I didn't think anything of it beyond that. And then when he came to us with the oath and the story, I totally forgot about him being the archivist. And we just went with that. But the tests, the cyclotron tests, and the various other chemical tests and tests on paper that were done on the Hoffman Oath, none of it contradicted a 17th century origin. At one point, it was thought that Hoffman may have removed an end paper from one of the Bay Psalm books because he examined both of them at Boston Public Library. And since then, one of those have been sold. But before that, my partner and I took the Hoffman Oath with us to Boston and laid it next to the two copies. And in one copy, the oath was bigger than the paper that had been trimmed. In the other copy, the paper was oversized. And so, in my opinion, it wouldn't have worked. When we were studying the oath initially, the copy at New York Public Library was made accessible to me. And we discovered that the oath was, that the Bay Psalm book is made up of 6 different types of paper. And one of the papers that's used for printing the oath was a direct match for one of the Bay Psalm book papers. And I mean, that gave us incredible enthusiasm, and we spent a lot of money traveling around doing all sorts of tests. Initially, there was only one scientist who said the oath was a fake. And with all respect, that gentleman was a Mormon, and he authenticated the Shroud of Turin. So I didn't feel that the credentials he was bringing was necessarily that authoritative. And basically, we believe that things are as they are. And people have tried to replicate the oath. And most people have never even seen the oath. They've seen photographs of it. They've seen in Hoffman's house, he had a printing plate of the oath and several copies of the oath printed. And I believe they've seen that, but that was printed on regular paper and had no comparison to the 17th century paper that the Hoffman oath that we were working with was printed on.
I want to back up for just 1 second. You know, it occurs to me that all of us in this conversation have had extensive experience learning about, holding, owning, saying something about Oath of a Freeman. A lot of folks who may be joining us on this conversation don't have the advantage that many of us do here. So Tyler, while you're here, I'd certainly like to take advantage of you in terms of talking about why you made a documentary about Mark Hoffman to begin with. You told me when we spoke for the purposes of the media release that I wrote not long ago, that you considered the Oath of a Freeman to be Mark Hoffman's Mona Lisa. Certainly of all the forgeries that you've certainly studied, as has Sam and as has Justin, all the forgeries with which he is connected, but certainly Oath is the one that you came back to and said again is his masterpiece. So talk to me about why you made the documentary and what it is about Oath of a Freeman that fascinated you so much.
I mean, I made the documentary for a number of reasons. One is it's a hell of a story. I mean, possibly the world's greatest forger, or the best forger that's ever been caught, one would say. I was raised in Utah. I was raised as a Mormon. I have consequently left, and I was always fascinated. A lot of my documentaries deal with belief and why people believe certain things. And Mark Hoffman is the pinnacle of that. He created remarkable documents, and for the most part, fooled everyone he came in contact with. He forged when he was 14, started forging early, and escalated to where he was fooling the Mormon Church, fooling some of the greatest document experts, fooling auction houses, and in this case, fooling or creating the most sought after American document in history, I would think. And in studying the ways that he created forgeries was remarkable. Mark was the ultimate package in creating these documents. He would find the right paper, he would find the right ink, he would use the right verbiage, he would use the right pen. He would do little things just to the point of like finding the dates on the postmark and making sure that it was a Tuesday, which is the only day they would deliver certain types of mail. And his techniques were remarkable as far as aging the ink and aging the paper. And his documents fooled everyone, but he knew, and I think initially Mark he had a need to fool, to deceive. At the age of 14, he forged a coin that fooled the Library of Congress. The U.S. Treasury. And the feeling that he must have had after that, to be 14 years old and to fool the United States Treasury. He wasn't fooling his teacher. He wasn't fooling his parents. He was fooling the Treasury. And I think he just had to continually do bigger and bigger and bigger forgeries. And the Oath was the biggest. Now, some of his forgeries were great. Some of them were sloppy and just passed. He knew that the Oath of a Freeman was one that would be scrutinized unlike any document he's ever created. So he went to great pains to find the right paper, which he ultimately found in a bookstore at BYU, a library at BYU, to create the right ink, to create the right lettering, to have the correct text, and also to create this provenance. That was the beauty of Mark, is that he had this gumption and gall to be able to just quietly and unassumingly sell these documents, this oh shucks style of look what I found in an old bookstore. And the oath was brilliant. It's beautiful. It is an artwork. And he painstakingly made it over weeks of time and built this whole story around it. We people, we humans love stories. We love the notion of finding an old document at a garage sale. You know, we all wish we could do that. And Mark did that. He made that. He created that element, and he put spins on it. It wasn't just like, he didn't just find an Emily Dickinson poem and have the poem, but on the back in pencil he wrote Aunt Emily, which made this whole, whose was it? Where did it come from? How did it come from? And he did the same with the oath. He wrote in pencil on the back of it, making it this whole interesting, where did it come from? So for me, in researching Mark and his entire life and going way overboard and finding out about who he was and what he did and what his motivations were, the oath to me was just this, like I said, it's the Mona Lisa. It is a beautiful piece of American history, even though it's not really, and it's a beautiful piece of forgery from the world's greatest forger, in my mind.
Samantha, talk a little bit about what the oath is meant to represent and how he was able to come up with the text for the Oath of a Free Man.
Sure. Well, the Oath of a Free Man was a document that people in Massachusetts Bay Colony were supposed to swear to, you know, when the Pilgrims first came to what later became the United States of America. And it was supposed to be the first document printed in the United States. So we know it existed at one point. We don't know how many copies of that were made. But until this one, there was no extant copy. You know, there was no, we didn't know about any of them. And actually, I can take it out if you
please take it out.
If you want me to, I can take it out.
Tyler, I know this must be difficult for you because you still have not actually seen it in person, correct?
I have not. I've never been able to see it.
But you have a copy of it behind you.
The evangelist Cotton Mather, who was with the Salem witchcraft trials, in the late 17th century, he began searching for the Oath of a Free Man. And it was from that point onwards that people were aware of its existence and have tried to find it. So it has a very long history.
Because it's been referenced in numerous texts. Right, Justin?
I'm sorry? Yes.
It's been referenced. I mean, people have been talking about it for 400 years.
Very well documented as a text. The text exists in manuscript, I believe, in the handwriting of the governor of Massachusetts, or at least the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And so there wasn't a question of creating the text. It was more a matter of creating the document itself.
Because there have been different iterations of the text, and that's what was so interesting. And that's what a lot of the work that the American Antiquarian Society did, right? They compared, you know, different known versions of the text.
Yes, that's quite true.
And he hit almost all the points except one. Established. That's what threw him off.
I know there had been arguments that because in the Oath of a Free Man, you have two letters overlapping each other, the ascender and descender. And people were saying that made it a paste up. But in fact, in my research, I found it wasn't until 1643 that Stephen Day, who managed the press, began using leading, separating the lines. So even in the Bay Psalm book, you will find ascenders, descenders overlapping.
Would you like me to hold it up to the camera, Sam? I have longer arms.
If you want. Do you want me to? It's gonna.
It won't reflect.
Yes, it will.
It shouldn't.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
We'll flip
Tyler, are you very jealous?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I am. It's nice.
There's the back of it.
They wrote on the back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that partly convinced me that it was real, because it was in a 17th century handwriting. However, when Hoffman was showing the oath to me for the first time, I turned it around and I saw the writing there, and I said, "What's this?" And almost innocently, he said, "I don't know." And that troubled me, because it isn't that difficult to read if you understand the handwriting. So, but in light of everything else, one forgets a slight inconsistency like that. He also thought, what is the value? And he was saying maybe $50,000. And my argument was, if this is real and it could be authenticated, it should be worth the value of an original Besant book. Back in 35 years ago, I set that value at 1.5 million. Since then, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, there was a copy of the Besant book sold, one of the copies at Boston Public, and that fetched close to 14 million. So again, if one extrapolated, you would have that value on the oath if it was real. I've lived with it for 35 years. I've had hills and valleys emotionally over it. I have great sympathy and condolences to the families that lost loved ones, to Mark's wife and children. It's a nightmare, a terrible thing. And so I'm essentially willing to accept that it has to be a forgery. But
Justin, it's taken you a long time to get there, though, right? I mean, you've actually, in our conversations and in other discussions, I think for a long time you held out hope that this was actually the real thing, right?
Well, because of the Hoffman story about being the archivist, because of the coincidence that there was an auction taking place in New York about 3 weeks after I had first seen him. And I gave him a copy of the catalog to the Sang collection being sold at Sotheby's. And they included in their inventory a copy of a book which contained a 17th century description of the Oath of a Freeman, a book printed in London, and gave the relevant text of the Oath of a Freeman. And Hoffman was reading through the catalog to see what he might like. And he called me up that evening when he got back to Salt Lake. And he said, I was reading the Sang catalog and they mentioned this book. Consequently, do you think this has anything to do with this document I just purchased? The idea of such a coincidence happening, I'm not aware of another copy of this 17th century English book. Samantha, do you remember what it was called? It's in your description.
Yeah, off the top of my head, no, I'd have to check. Actually, I can just check my description.
It's called, the book is called New England Jonas, called Up at London. And it was published 1642. for that remarkable coincidence to have taken place, I didn't think it was possible. Inside, deep inside, I can't help but feel there is a slight possibility that the oath is real. But having said that, it's good luck to anyone who buys it. It's certainly a very important historical document, the most famous 20th century American forgery. And Hoffman is certainly the most infamous of forgers in modern times. I think it's really a matter of continuous study and research, but eventually the attitude currently is that the oath is a forgery, partly because the McCrone Institute in Chicago has reevaluated it, and from saying it was authentic back in 30 years ago, they're now saying it's not authentic. And they, in what they used was the handwriting Hoffman had on back of the oath. And that had all the crackling in it, apparently, that is known to exist in Hoffman forgeries. So, you know, I've accepted all that, but it's still a remarkable coincidence that this Jonas book was turning up at the same time that Hoffman was creating something like this. Ultimately, I understand that the document he brought into the New York bookshop to theoretically purchase out of their portfolios was something completely different, a Civil War document that Hoffman simply overlaid the title, Oath of a Freeman, on. So in creating a cash register receipt, they could give him one that would include the title, Oath of a Freeman, $25, listing a few other things as well that he was buying.
According to Mark, now mind you, Mark is the most unreliable of narrators there is, but according to Mark, he did create an oath that he purchased the first time at Argosy. However, it was a really, it was a mediocre forgery. It was done very quickly and cheaply. But I've never heard that, Justin, but it may be the case that it was another document. He bought 5 items that day, so it may be in there, who knows?
And certainly the, I think what his fear would have been if he had brought in the oath that he brought to us, which looks incredibly authentic. At the cash register, one of the Argosy employees could look at it and say, oh, that's not our handwriting, or this shouldn't have been where you bought it, and just put it into a drawer. So he needed to create something that you could have no idea of mistaking for being genuine. And given the archivist story, he would need to create a provenance. But having said all of that, you know, at this point, we must accept the fact that the oath is a forgery. And I think the description that Heritage did of it is extremely responsible, extremely well developed, and I have no argument with it.
Tyler, I want to get to something for just a minute. Samantha and I have had a lot of talks about Oath of a Freeman for the last several weeks. And I will ask her in a moment why you've got so interested in it. She still weeks after the catalog has been put to bed and her description has been written and the press release has gone out, she has gotten very, 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 she still goes to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning after having read yet another book on Oath of a Freeman, which I find fascinating. And I'll ask her that in just a moment, why she does that. But I want to know, certainly Hoffman was what was probably best known for the Salamander letter, the letter that cast doubt on the origin of the Mormon church. That is certainly a thing that led to him committing 2 murders to cover up these forgeries. That is why he's in prison in Utah for the rest of his life.
Robert, I should make a correction in the reports that have been given out. Utah, I think of as Gary Gilmore country, where you commit murder and you're shot in the heart. And I mean, this, I believe, is probably still on the books. The reason Hoffman was given initially he plea bargained and was given initially 5 to 15 years in prison for 2 murders was by his agreeing to admit to forging the White Salamander letter and the Oath of a Freeman.
Right.
The White Salamander letter one could understand because it really does disrupt the makings of the Mormon Church, the foundation. The Oath of a Freeman would give him credibility as a researcher. And so having both of those declared forgeries by his own admission was what the prosecutor wanted to get. And so he agreed to that, and he was sentenced initially to 5 to 15 years. After, I think, the first 3 years, he came up in front of the parole board, and they turned down the idea of an early release without any discussion. They said he shows no remorse, and we expect he's going to have to serve the full 15 years.
Right.
After that, so the story goes that I heard, Hoffman put out a hit on the lives of the entire parole board. This was organized while he was in prison. And one of the prisoners with whom he was organizing this obviously snitched on him. At which point the parole board resentenced him to life imprisonment. So that's the full story as I understand. Ultimately, it's the same thing that we have,
right,
but with a very curious hiccup in the middle.
Tyler, I'd like to go back and address that, and I appreciate that, Justin. To address your interest in it, you and I discussed this a few months ago, that you said you would have liked to have made an entire episode of Murder Among the Mormons just about Oath of a Freeman.
Well, the reason I said that is, I mean, Tyler did an excellent job. Originally, he told me that the script was intended to be 6 episodes. And at the last moment, they cut it down to 3. And since the attention was geared towards Mormonism, the majority of the escapades, if you will, dealt with Mormon forgeries. The oath was certainly dealt with, but one would need to have a little more background to understand the full impact and the importance of the oath. And it was with that idea that I said, it's too bad we can't create a 4th episode on the auctioning of the oath and fill in all the blanks. Tyler has several hours of unused footage of me being interviewed. And I don't think I ever told him this, but I realized in watching the Murder Among the Mormons that a body double is used for both me and Mark Hoffman to replicate us having dinner together in New York City, and the lining up of all the little bottles, the little glasses of whiskey that allegedly I was having him drink. That wasn't true. I think at best, Mark might have had 2 drinks, not the dozen that was described by his fellow traveler.
Well,
But,
Tyler, hang on, Justin. I'm going to interrupt you just a second. Tyler, talk to me about that interest in murder, in the Oath of a Freeman, and why you kept coming back to it. And in fact, I believe even behind you, you actually have an enlarged photo of Murder Among the Mormons, of the Oath of a Freeman, that's autographed by everyone who was actually in Murder Among the Mormons.
Yeah, the Oath was interesting to me in the documentary. You know, Mark created a great deal of documents, so many, possibly hundreds. But we can't tell the entire story of Mark, and we only had 3 episodes. I mean, would we have liked to do 6? Absolutely, but we just had to compress the story into 3. But we decided to focus on the Anthon transcript, his first document, the Salamander letter, and the Oath. Otherwise, we'd have gotten to the weeds with every one of his documents. And that was his progression in many ways. Anthon, his first major document, Salamander, and then the Oath. But with the Oath, I wish I could have told a little bit more. And I see that some people have some questions. And mostly, I just wanted to see the creation, like how Mark created this document. Because again, like I said previously, this was his most copious amount of work that he did. He studied for a month. He researched for a month on how to do this, how to make this document.
He even made the ink from a formula for 17th century ink.
Yeah, what he did with the ink was he created, and we covered it a little bit in the film, but he made this little chimney. He had this little glass kiln, if you will. And he burned old 17th century paper that he'd stolen from the BYU library in a glass tube. And the smoke would go on the chimney, and he'd scrape that off. And he mixed the ashes with linseed oil, and he boiled it to the right consistency, and then it thickened. And then he cut some leather binding from a book, and he boiled that in distilled water until it turned brown. Then he added beeswax to it. And then he added a turpentine, a pine gum turpentine shellac. And he got this method from a book. And he did this because he was afraid that it would be carbon dated, which it ultimately was. And so it was the correct ink from that period. The paper he found, and he had to match the chain marks from a book, from essentially the same paper that Stephen Day brought over from England. And he found that in a bookstore in BYU, and it had the exact same chain marks. But what he did with the lettering is that he found a replication of it at the U of U library. He took the metal strips out of the book, and he took it home, and he cut the pages out, cut the letters out with an X-Acto knife, and then he glued them onto a sheet of paper. And from that, he was able to make the zinc printing plate from de Bozac. And he used his name, Mike Hansen, which ultimately, if you've seen the film, got him in trouble. One thing he did that was interesting when he ordered the plate is at the bottom of it, he had them put a disclaimer that said, this is only used for educational purposes, not for real printing, so that it would throw the scent off of de Bozac. Of course, he filed that off when he got it home. And then he filed it down. He filed the letters down so that it was in the right, so that it looked aged. And then he got the paper. He practiced it a couple times. He practiced it on ordinary paper. And then he put the actual paper in on a block of wood, put the press over it, a piece of felt, and then a C-clamp to hold it down. And then to age the document, he did this brilliant thing, which we covered in the film a little bit. he needed to create ozone, and ozone can't be stored. It needs to be manufactured. So what he did is he got this aquarium. He got a 5-gallon aquarium. The top was covered by a piece of glass, and he put the piece of paper in it. And it was, and then he put the plug into a 110-volt outlet. And one piece of the wire went into the glass lid, under the glass lid. The other piece went into a mason jar filled with water and salt. And then the two sparks, the two wires came together to create a spark. It sucked the ozone out of the paper, out of the aquarium, and aged the document. And this caused a browning or a kind of a hazing effect in the paper. And then
you can see foxing. I mean, there is foxing on this, which is certainly something we look for.
Yeah, water stains, right?
Would you like me to hold it up again?
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
No, to put it back in the thing. I don't want to. I'm the last guy who wants to do anything other than.
I washed my hands beforehand. Nobody worry.
Is there that it's there? Yeah, it's.
Yeah, especially at the bottom, you can see it.
Yeah, there it is.
I'm glad I did my nails today.
Yeah. In the film, we also showed him using this vacuum. And he did that with this document because ink falls, you know, it soaks through a paper after many, many years. But since Mark had just created this, the ink didn't have time to soak through. So what he did is he put it on a metal screen, and he used just a handheld vacuum, and he put it underneath the document, and it sucked the ink through the paper, which, I mean, is just frankly genius.
Absolutely brilliant.
Right. And then for the handwriting on the back, he created another type of ink. And he wrote on the back, Oath of a Freeman with an E, O-A-T-H-E of a Freeman. And it's
that was one question somebody asked, what does it say on the back?
Right. It's funny. What he did is, it's so interesting because he created the ink and he had a nib, a pen from that era, but he didn't have a feather, he said. He didn't have a feather. So he went through his house, and in a drawer in the kitchen where they kept old stuff, everyone has one, he found a green feather that his kids had, like an Indian feather that they played with. And he stuck it on the nib, and he wrote Oath of the Freeman on the back, which is just, you know, fantastic. He did this all in his basement.
So is that what interests you the most, the process, or what interests you the most, the mind of someone who would dare even do such a thing?
I think what it comes down to is it's his culmination. I mean, he had worked really hard, and there's times when he said, when I made this document, I wasn't a very good forger. I mean, the Anthon transcript is a terrible forgery. It should have never passed the muster. He literally made it in his kitchen using household items. But progressively, he got better and better and better. And this was the culmination of it. This was his best one. As a filmmaker who puts so much time and effort into how a film is made and the behind the scenes that you'll never see. You see the documentary. What you don't see is all the work that went behind it. And the preparation and the planning and the research. That's where I kind of got a little jealous of Mark. He was able to create history and rewrite history, and the power he must have felt to rewrite history. I mean, my God, that must be remarkable. And as Mark said in his own words, if somebody says it's genuine, it becomes genuine. The mental gymnastics that he must have had to actually believe, and he believed that Oath of a Freeman was real because somebody said it was real. And that's why he was so able to sell it so effectively, because in his mind, he believed it was real. So the whole story around it, including Mr. Schiller's story, who is honestly one of such a salt of the earth, such a good man, who when he found this document, I can't imagine the feeling that one must have when you hold something in your hands. When you hold something that you've looked for your whole life, and it's a essential part of Americana, the feeling one must have must be remarkable.
Well, and Justin did everything right. He took it to all the right experts. He got it tested by the best labs. in the country. And that's what makes this so remarkable, is that Hoffman was able to fool the absolute best of the best.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the best of the best, and just kept doing it and kept doing it. And I think he just had to keep getting better and better and better. His ego needed that. He needed to feed this beast of deception. And why not? Why not make and create the biggest document that you can find? So remarkable. Some of the questions people are asking.
Yeah, please go ahead and grab them, because you're.
One is the Bay Psalm book, which you might be better to describe that, Justin Schiller, but that was the first book printed in the United States. Stephen Day used the same printing press that the Oath was supposedly printed from. And there are, maybe 5 of those in existence?
No, it's probably like around 20.
Oh, okay.
15 to 20. But they're amongst the most valuable books in the world. As I said, within the last couple of years, one sold at Sotheby's, New York for $14 million. And the only book I could think that might fetch more would be a Gutenberg Bible, which is probably up around 50 million.
The next question was, the plate produced by him by the DeBozek Engraving Company ever been found or its existence documented? We do have the receipts and copies made. In fact, I actually have a beautiful copy that the police made from the same film. I actually have it. It's a print. I should have brought it and showed it. It's beautiful, of the Oath that they made copies of in order to prove that he could make copies from this Oath. Whoever buys this, if you're interested, I could sell that too. But
we do private treaties.
Wait, before you answer a couple more, and I appreciate you doing that, Tyler. You're an excellent moderator. Justin, I do want you to address something that Tyler just said a moment ago, which is the thrill of holding that thing in your hand, thinking for that moment that it is in fact the real thing, that it is in fact one of the most important documents in printed American history. What is that like for you? What was that like? And then what was it like when you discovered that this was in fact not this incredibly special Holy Grail thing that you thought it was?
Well, I'm not an Americana specialist. My specialty has been historical children's books.
Sure.
But certainly I'm educated. I understand American history. And I never heard of the Oath of a Freeman before Mark brought it to my attention. But then I did my research, and it was incredible that this was, in fact, the very first document that was printed in what's now the United States. Originally, the printer that was on board the ship, I guess the Mayflower, coming over from Europe, he died on board. And Stephen Day was an apprentice to him. And he ended up taking over the printing. And so for the first couple of years, it was all a process of learning. But being able to be part of this link or chain, if you will, of discovering the earliest piece of printing, that was very thrilling for me. And it's why I kept going for decades. I mean, Hoffman purchased from us, representing the sellers, the Pforzheimer family, an original Charles Dickens manuscript for $330,000. He paid initially $100,000, but he told me that he wouldn't be able to pay the balance on schedule. Well, the people selling it, the Pforzheimer family, had changed the date of their fishing expedition so they could be in New York to receive the second payment from Hoffman. And as such, this was something that simply wasn't possible to discover. And it's why we had to take out a bank loan against our company to give the Pforzheimers the $200,000 that Mark Hoffman owed through us. But people sometimes think that we were representing Hoffman in the sale of the Charles Dickens. Not at all. We were representing this incredible family of great collectors. But that's the scenario.
Tyler, I see you have your copy there.
Sorry, I found it. This is the plate, the actual plate that the Salt Lake City investigators created from the de Bozek receipt that they used to print the replication of it. This is the actual one. And it actually has it at the bottom, the disclaimer, which is backwards, so I can't read it. But nonetheless, this is it. So this is the exact type of plate that Mark would have used to print it. And then according to what he said he did, he put it in a brown paper bag and put it in the fire. What he did is that after the police searched his home when he was arrested, they unfortunately didn't find this or what Mark's copy of it. So he came home, when he came home after being in the hospital, he came home and he had a nice fire with his family. And they thought it was kind of cute that they were having this cute little fire like they never do. But what Mark was doing was actually burning the evidence, including the plate. This is amazing.
So let me just say this, knowing what I know about Samantha's obsession with the Oath of a Free Man, you've just now become her all-time favorite person and given her something entirely new to obsess over. But I do want to know, Sam, as we begin to wrap this up, what is it about this? Your whole life has been spent in rare books, in the real printed word. What is it about this forgery that has obsessed you to the point where you continue to read about it even hours before the auction?
It's hard to say. It's hard. I think as a scholar, there's some sort of fascination with how he was able to fool so many people. I mean, there's no denying his brilliance. I mean, his genius, really. But I mean, I preface that with saying evil genius. I mean, there is a clear bad. No one's saying he's a good person. What he did was horrific. But it wasn't just shoddy work putting this together and creating something that fooled, the eminent minds of my industry, people that I look up to and people that I actively study. And, it reminds us that we're all human and it's not an exact science what we do. I make mistakes every day doing this job, but I learn every day. And so it makes me feel some sort of camaraderie with those that have come before me, that we can learn, we can study material like this, and we can make sure that things like this don't happen again, that forgeries like this are caught. I mean, he wasn't just dealing in forgeries, he was trading his forgeries for authentic documents. So many items passed through his hands, and we don't know where all of them are today. I'd love to do a survey of Hoffman forgeries.
And he was also creating history.
Right, exactly. And I'm a student of history, so it's important that I study all of it. I don't just get to pick and choose what history I study. I have to study all of it, the good and the bad. And the fascinating, like this.
You'll still read about this even after somebody else owns it, won't you?
Absolutely. I mean, I learned so much today talking to Tyler, talking to Justin. Every time I read another book about this, I learn something new. Every time I look at it, I learn something new.
I might mention, along with Selling the Oath comes our entire reference library.
Most of which I have read.
About 10 volumes, including the Hoffman transcripts of his trial, various books written about Hoffman forgeries, written about one book particularly written about the oath, the
Judgment of Experts.
But you also have books written about famous forgers, and Hoffman has a chapter there. So whoever does end up with it will have weeks and weeks of reading to catch up on.
If it's me, it'll take me like, I don't know, two days to read the rest of the book.
So who do we think winds up with?
And also years to obsess.
Yes.
Well, I mean,
yes.
who do you, I'd like to sort of hear from all three of you who you believe will wind up with something like this. Is it, certainly there are people who collect forgeries. If you're going to collect a forgery, this is certainly the most renowned or infamous one to own. But there are also, as you say, this does at some point become a part, for better or for worse, of American history. So, to the three of you, and I'll begin with you, Justin, as it is your copy that we're auctioning, who do you believe will wind up with this, and who would you like to see wind up with it? Not specific people, but certainly the kind of collector or scholar.
I would like to see it goes to a repository, a private collection, or a library, a museum that will not only preserve it and maintain it for what it is, but also never stop researching it. And like I say, I'm sure no one else will believe me, but there's a small, minimal bit of hope that it still is real, because so much of my energy had been pushed into working on this. And we even took it over to England to show a specialist in type design. And he was the one who said the design is too modern for it to have been a 17th century creation. And that itself was a very interesting perspective. I never thought about it. So there's a lot of things that one will still be able to study, but what's most important is that people realize, despite all the other forgeries, copies that Hoffman and the Salt Lake City police have made of this, there is only one genuine Mark Hoffman oath. And this is the one that Heritage is selling on Wednesday.
Tyler?
I'm a storyteller. I love the beginning and a middle and an end of a story. And while this is a great document in and of itself, it's got a story behind it, both the actual history of the oath itself, the forgery of it, and but also in some ways it's a piece of movie history, because it was an essential piece of Murder Among the Mormons. So because of the success of that series, thank you, Netflix, you have something that people will know of. They'll say, oh my God, I saw that on Netflix. Or if they haven't seen it, they will see it. So the storytelling aspect of owning this, of showing it to your friends who may or may not know the story because they watched it, adds a little bit more spice to the document itself. It gives it a little bit more of a story for the owner.
What about you, Sam? Who do you see ending up with this? You certainly talk. I mean, I know you've gotten a lot of questions about it from folks kind of spanning the gamut in terms of their interest and their expertise.
I don't know. I don't know who's going to win it. I don't know how much it's going to sell for, but I would hope that whoever is the successful bidder will make it available to scholars to be studied. I mean, that's what I've been doing for months with this thing, is studying its history, studying the physicality of the document, reading every book, listening to every podcast, watching I've only seen Murder Among the Mormons twice, Tyler. And I've taken notes. I've taken a lot of notes. I've filmed parts with my phone so I can go back and watch it later. Yeah, I'm obsessed. It was a beautiful film. You did a great job. It was fantastic. But yeah, I hope whoever buys it will make it available for study, because it is remarkable. There's not much more I can say. I mean, it's remarkable.
But isn't that it? Isn't that ultimately what you hope someone does with it in the end, is to say, this is how it was done, and this is how we can avoid it, as you said, making sure this doesn't happen again, making sure that someone like Justin doesn't wind up with something that is seemingly on the face of it so enormous and so significant, and that can lead you down a rabbit trail for decades. I mean, Justin, I can't imagine the relief it will be to finally have this gone. I mean, you and I talked about this a little bit. It is something that has weighed on you for decades.
For 35 years. And, if I had the opportunity with hindsight to do it again, I would still do it again, because I believe in knowing the truth about something. One needs to do all the research. As Samantha said, we went to all the experts. We did the scientific testing. We did everything that seemed humanly possible. And mostly, we were left with question marks. And it's ended up now, the only question mark is what will happen to it. The Heritage Auction, as I said, did an excellent job in describing it as a creation of Mark Hoffman. One can't do anything else but this nowadays. And talking about the future, I think it hopefully will be available to researchers, and that whoever ends up with it will be blessed in knowing that, if nothing else, they have what was advertised, a forgery. And maybe down the road, 200 years from now, something will happen that it turns out to be real.
Boy, you're really just, you just, there's that little part of you that just won't let that go, right? That just wants it to be the real thing, right, Justin?
35 years is half my lifetime. And you can't let go so easily.
Yeah, I imagine it's been, I can't imagine, quite frankly, the toll that takes on one's heart and one's mind. It must be extraordinary. Look, we've been here an hour, bless you.
Thank you.
We've been here an hour, and I don't want to take up much more of everybody's time. The Oath of a Freeman, in this container, actually, that was made for the Library of Congress, correct, Justin?
I believe so, yes.
Made by the Library of Congress when they were considering it. In fact, the New York Times did a piece, I believe, a month after the murders took place, about the oath and the interest in it from the Antiquarian Society and from the Library of Congress, because
the American Antiquarian Society, after the Library of Congress released their claim on wanting first option, the American Antiquarian Society in Worcester wanted it, and they initially offered $250,000 to purchase it, but we felt if it was as good as we believed it to be, that wasn't enough money. And now, 30 years later, what is enough money? We'll find out on Wednesday.
The auction is Wednesday afternoon. It's in the second session of the Rare Books auction. That session begins at 3 p.m. Central Time. The Oath of a Freeman will come up somewhere around an hour or so into the auction. It's at live.ha.com or ha.com. You can certainly go see Oath of a Freeman there. I can't thank everybody enough. Tyler, I guess before we let you go, you've done such an excellent job as the question answerer or asker. Is there one question left in the chat that we should get to before we cut everybody loose? And I do appreciate, by the way, we've had more than 100 people with us for the last hour. And I can't thank you enough. We'll make this available as well on YouTube for everybody to watch it afterwards if there are folks who want to. But Tyler, is there one question that you think is essential to letting us get out of here?
I mean, I think the story of Mark and Mark Hoffman is exceptional because he was able to pull the wool over so many people's eyes. And he did it very well. And there's no shame in being dunked on by Michael Jordan, if you will. But it does lead us to believe that we do need to look a little closer. If something does appear to be too good to be true, it may be. And we live in a time when we have information literally at our fingertips, literally. And it seems like in some ways we've gone backwards. We're believing things we shouldn't. So the story of Mark Hoffman in pushing these lies is important for us as citizens to just look a little deeper, perhaps, and maybe think there might be a snake in the grass trying to pull one over on me.
Well, gentlemen, Samantha, I really appreciate this. This has been informative and as entertaining as I had hoped. Justin and Tyler, I can't thank you enough for joining us. It's been tremendous to have you here. And as Samantha said, if she can learn something after all this time, I can't imagine how informative this has been for everybody else. We'll see everybody on Wednesday. Thanks very, very much for being here, everybody.
It's our pleasure.
You bet. Thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, everyone.